This is All Saints Church in Kempston. It's a very old church. It was constructed by the Normans in 1099, although there are signs in the brickwork of a previous Anglo-Saxon building that stood on the site. Now, in the 12th and 15th centuries, the church was extended and modified, including heightening the tower so they could put in the bells. And these bells are still rung out over the great River Ouse, across Kempston and the surrounding villages today. In 1823, they added a mausoleum. This was the final part of the church we see today. And it's around 1823 that our story takes place. It's fitting that we should be here, because this is where you'll find the Lilley brothers. And they are our story. The Lilley brothers of Kempston. Now, the Lilley brothers were born into poverty. Their father, Thomas Lilley, was for some strange reason left out of his father's will, and therefore his entire family were paupers. There were 10 children. Not all of them survived childhood. Matthias was born in 1802 and William was born in 1808. Times were very, very hard. When you're born into poverty and you're a pauper in the early 1800s, you don't get a lot of breaks, and you do whatever you can to make ends meet. And like many of the young people of the day with families and food to put on the table, that often included going out and trying to get a bit of food from somewhere where you shouldn't really be. Now, poaching game, bunny rabbits, pheasants, other edibles from other people's land was not uncommon back in the early 1800s. In fact, it was rife. People just didn't have a lot of money, food, and they were forced to do whatever they could. Poaching is how it's normally termed, and the boys were known poachers. In fact, they'd both been in Bedford jail for minor poaching offences. Whenever you go out poaching, the biggest problem is running into the gamekeeper. It's the gamekeeper's job to make sure that nobody goes on his master's land and takes what's not theirs. It really was a case of the rich had it all and the poor couldn't really have anything at all. So that was always the risk of going out in the hours of darkness and trying to get something to put in the pot. You might run into the gamekeeper and his assistants. And if you did, sometimes things could get quite ugly. So let's get some perspective on the early 1800s, shall we? Thousands of soldiers had returned from the Napoleonic Wars. They all wanted something to do as well. They were all looking for work. Then you had the Corn Law, which had pushed the price of bread through the roof. Now, if you think bread's popular today, it was pretty darn essential for the poor back in the early 1800s. The price of bread going up was bad news. Then there was the Poor Law. Now, that had been around for a long, long time in one form or another. One of the rules of that was that you weren't supposed to go outside of your parish to look for work. So if there was nothing in your area, tough. All of these things and a whole lot more meant life back then was pretty miserable, and people really struggled to get by if they were paupers. So, what do we know about that fateful night? Well, we know that shots were heard and the gamekeeper and his assistants came out to see who was about. Now, they might have had a pretty good idea that it was the Lilley brothers, to be honest. I mean, they were known in the area. They were known for poaching. They'd even done time for it. So there may have even been the odd vendetta, the odd score to settle for previous forays into the woods. We don't know for sure. But one thing's for sure is what happened that night got very nasty indeed and turned out very, very bad for the Lilley brothers. The gamekeeper and his assistants caught up with the Lilley brothers, and as was often the case, shots were fired and things got rather bloody. Now, one of the gamekeeper's assistants was a man called Thomas King, and he took some shot to the top of the head. He survived, but his testimony and the testimony of his colleagues in court was what really put the Lilley brothers in big trouble. So, after a short spell in jail, the boys went to trial, and it was at this trial that the gamekeeper and his assistants gave their evidence, and they said that the Lilley brothers shot first. Unprovoked, they opened fire on the gamekeeper and his assistants. That's when Thomas King ducked but took some shot to the head and suffered a rather nasty wound. Now, the judge and the jury listened to the evidence and they decided that the boys were guilty of attempted murder. And the judge sentenced the Lilley brothers to be hanged. Now, it's fair to say that when sentence was passed, many people were outraged. They were absolutely furious that the boys had been found guilty of attempted murder and were going to be hanged. Even the counsel for the prosecution had begged leniency for the brothers. 172 people in the surrounding area signed a petition. Many of these people were very, very well respected. They were urging the judge to reconsider and lighten the sentence. The petition was unsuccessful. Did the boys really try and murder gamekeeper Thomas King? I mean, why would they? They know for a sure fact that if they murder the gamekeeper, they're definitely going to hang for murder, not just attempted murder. So why would they even attempt it? There were witness accounts of the evening that said multiple shots were heard. So who really knows who fired the first shot and who was firing in self-defence? And we'll talk more about self-defence and being attacked very shortly. Now, there was even a folk song written about this, and there's a line in that folk song that states quite clearly the feelings of a large percentage of the public at the time. The line in the song states that the account given in court by gamekeeper Thomas King was a bloody lie. Now, at the time that this was all going on, there was a rather prominent figure in Bedfordshire called Thomas Potter McQueen, MP. Thomas Potter McQueen was a Bedfordshire man, and he cared very much about the plight of the poor. And we're very, very lucky that he visited Bedford Jail at this time and gave us an account of his findings. This is what Thomas Potter McQueen wrote. January 1829. There were 96 prisoners for trial in Bedford Jail, of whom 76 were able-bodied men in the prime of life and chiefly of good character, who were driven to crime by sheer want, and who would have been valuable subjects had they been placed in a situation where, by the exercise of their health and strength, they could have earned a subsistence. There were in this number 18 poachers awaiting trial for the capital offence of using arms in self-defence when attacked by gamekeepers. Of these men, only one was not a parish pauper. But it doesn't stop there, it gets even better. Because while he was at the jail, Thomas Potter McQueen interviewed the Lilley brothers. Now, what you're going to get first is his account, and then you're going to get a reply to his question from the eldest brother, Matthias Lilley. They were remarkably fine young men and very respectably connected. The elder, 28 years of age, married with 2 small children. When I inquired how he could lend himself to such a wretched course of life, the poor fellow replied, "Sir, I had a pregnant wife, with 1 infant at her knee and another at her breast. I offered myself in all directions without success. If I went to a distance, I was told to go back to my parish. And when I did so, I was allowed what? For myself, my babes, and a wife in a condition more than common support, and unable to labour, I was allowed 7 shillings for all. For which I was expected to work on the roads from light to dark, and pay 3 guineas a year for the hovel that sheltered us." The accounts of Thomas Potter McQueen give us a fantastic insight into the plight of people at this time, and indeed the Lilley brothers. Note the use of his wording there about Bedford Jail. People who are chiefly of good character, driven there by sheer want. He's making it clear that these people don't feel they have a choice. And what about that last part as well? About the gamekeepers attacking the poachers and the poachers pleading self-defence. This is all written with sympathy and understanding about what they were going through and what they were driven to do. And Matthias Lilley makes that quite clear in his reply in the last part as well. Murderers? They didn't seem like murderers to me. I guess we'll never really know what happened that night. What we do know is that by all accounts, the boys were pretty good chaps, well respected, and just doing whatever they could as husbands and fathers to put food on the table and make ends meet in very, very difficult times. Quite typical behaviour of a lot of people in the early 1800s. I guess you could say they were probably just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, that's the story of the famous Lilley brothers of Kempston, and it's been an absolute pleasure to tell it to you. Why? Because they're my ancestors, that's why. Until the next time, folks, take care, all the best, see you soon.